Hey there, Sean Kevelighan here again with another Executive Exchange. Joining me today is Bob Marshall. He's co-founder and CEO of Whisker Labs. We've had the fortune to be introduced to Whisker Labs over the last couple of years, and we're just learning a ton. And Bob, welcome. Thanks for joining us again.
Sean, it is great to be here as always.
So, Bob, I always got to ask you, what is this Ting that Whisker Labs is doing?
Yeah, so look, I mean, Ting, you guys are leading the push to predict and prevent, right? And fire is like the second leading peril for home insurance carriers, and so my sister-in-law's house burned down several years ago from an electrical fire. They're relatively low frequency, but they're really severe, terrible, circumstances, terrible experiences for the homeowners. Obviously, huge losses for the insurers. So we developed a smart plug. So it's just it's like the size of a nightlight. You plug it in, connect it to Wi-Fi. Super sophisticated though, machine learning, AI. We detect problems in the wiring that cause electrical fires. So we prevent 80% of the electrical fires in homes. Obviously,
Wow.
that results in a fantastic experience for the customers of our insurance partners, and then just reduce losses for them as well.
Yeah, and so you mentioned fires being number two, but we also know that flooding is number one, and I understand that there's a water prevention component to this as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, fire is our lead use case. That's why we developed the product. But we measure electricity and voltage, but we also have a temperature sensor. So non-weather water losses are a huge peril for carriers, and we prevent water losses in a number of ways. So we detect problems every day across the country with sump pumps and water heaters. And I had one here at my house years ago. When a water heater fails catastrophically, it's just a mess, right? I mean, there's a flood
Right.
everywhere. So we detect, so water and electricity just don't mix. So when water interacts with electricity, we detect it. We often detect problems with water heaters and sump pumps before they can cause a flood. So we prevent those losses. And then really importantly too, so we have a temperature sensor. So frozen pipes are a real problem, right? So in the wintertime, you may be down in Florida on vacation or have a Florida home and you got a home in Minnesota and the heat stops working, right? I mean, that's just a catastrophe for the homeowner and the insurer, right? That's a terrible water loss. So we prevent those frozen pipe losses as well.
That's great. And something as well for everybody to consider,
Yeah.
when a lot of these water heaters you mentioned are down in the basement, and depending on your insurance, that may not be considered a dwelling. So whatever is damaged might not be part of your insurance policy. So good again to have some preventative detection.
Yeah.
So we're getting more of these tings in the network, and what does that mean besides everybody being able to check their app like I do? You get a little email every week from Sophie, but what does it mean when we've got more and more people? I think you mentioned to me you got maybe 1 million people or so, or 1 million homes now getting close to
Yeah,
with
we're
ting.
about we're approaching 500,000. We'll be at a million in a few months now. But yeah, so an individual Ting sensor, if you think about it, monitors the electrical grid of the home. So your home has a whole wiring grid, and we monitor that with a single sensor. But then the network of Ting sensors monitors the electric utility grid. And I'm afraid that we're all seeing now that the electric utility grid is causing catastrophic damage to homes and communities and people. We probably saw it in Maui. We've seen it with some of the worst wildfires in the western states in California. And the insurers are bearing the brunt of these things. I mean, you're seeing it with the risk crisis, right? I mean, you're seeing insurers having to pull out of states like California because the wildfire risk and losses are just too high. So again,
Right.
I think there's an opportunity here to leverage IoT and data, machine learning and artificial intelligence to predict and prevent here, right? We're predicting and
Yeah.
preventing fires inside of homes. But when you put the network of sensors together, we can detect problems on the grid that often result in some of the worst wildfires. And that's something that's going to be just a huge thing going forward, not only for individual homes, but communities, and obviously for our insurers. I mean, if you can predict these things, these are multi-billion dollar, tens of billions of dollar events in some cases.
No, absolutely. And again, to your point, these are large events, and we oftentimes are trying to talk about how resilience is, in particular around climate risk resilience or any type of catastrophe resilience, it's got to be a communal effort. And so, as you're getting data from that community and able to prevent that, that's going to be very important. But what about any other trends that are coming out of this growing network that you have?
And I think the grid resilience is a thing, right? I mean, and you're talking a lot about climate risk, and you're seeing the impacts not only in Florida with hurricanes in the southern states, but and the wildfires. But the thing that people are beginning to realize is that climate risk and grid resilience risk are kind of inextricably linked. I mean, the electric utility grid has, which we all rely on every single day. I mean, we're electrifying society. Everything is plugged in. It just has to work safely and reliably. And that grid has to be able to withstand the weather and climate conditions that it's going to face not only now, but what will it face in the future? And, if you don't have data to monitor the grid and understand what's going on, then catastrophic things happen, like we've seen recently with the wildfires. And, we've got an opportunity to leverage IoT and machine learning and data to help the utilities. It's going to be, that's something that we've got to work on as a community, because the utilities, unfortunately, just don't have the kind of data and sensors to understand what's going on their grid, and they need to.
Yeah, and so again, I mean, Whisker Labs is on both big sides of the property casualty industry, right? The personal side with the devices themselves in the homes, but the commercial side with the likes of the energy companies and community. So good stuff happening here. Good insight for consumers to have. Personally, I love it. I've got a 200-year-old little wood framed house where my grid is definitely not as probably resilient as most. So I appreciate having
they don't improve with age.
Exactly. So, Bob, you got one question for me now.
Yeah, Sean, obviously you all are, I see about, this and everything you're communicating is, I mean, there's just a huge risk crisis out there. And the promise of using IoT and sensors to predict and prevent is obviously the vision that's there. It can be executed. But, when the insurers are struggling every day and with losses that are exceeding the revenue, how do we get this stuff to scale? How do we get them to think strategically here?
You're absolutely right. I mean, it comes down to people need to change their behaviors, really. And that's what at III we're trying to help invoke people to understand that this is a community problem. The price, as you mentioned, insurers needing to pull out of different states, some states because of regulatory challenges. But the price of risk and the price of insurance is the effect of the risk, not the cause. Right. And so if we can get to what the causes are and from a community and collective angle begin to tackle them, that's going to reduce the risk and hopefully reduce the price of risk. But, it does take a village, literally, to make this stuff happen. What I also think needs to happen for the scalability of it is just the trust element, too, is people understanding really what's behind using this data, sharing this data. It oftentimes comes back to what we're talking about: safety, prediction, prevention. Nobody benefits from that loss happening, whether it's on the business side of insurance or the consumer side. I mean, some things that are lost in catastrophes are irreplaceable. So as we can scale this and help people understand that the data they're providing, whether it's in the car and the telematics of the car and helping your driving patterns, to this, helping you understand what's in your home, how its electricity is functioning, and where there may be risks. All of this will allow us to change our behaviors, get that feedback, change behaviors, and make our living places a safer area. So it is very important, but we got to get people to understand it and understand their role more and more. And that's what we're trying to do at III for sure.
No, we certainly appreciate your leadership on this. It is, predict and prevent is the future, and, we've just got to work on it together.
Absolutely. Bob, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for listening in on another Executive Exchange.
Thanks, Sean.